Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video we have my Game Week 21 deadline decisions. This is a weekly series where I take you through your final questions and dilemmas ahead of the upcoming deadline. If you get any use out of today's video, please do smash that like button. Make sure to subscribe as well. But without further ado, let's jump into it. So as you can probably imagine, especially looking at your own team, there are a lot of questions this week around taking hits and also potentially playing the wildcard. I would love to know down below in the comments, how many hits are you planning on taking? How many flag players do you have? And are you tempted to play the wildcard? One question that I received was, at what point do we choose to wildcard instead of taking a hit? Like, at what point does it become too much of a points hit to justify the wildcard? And then someone else just simply asked, is a wildcard viable this week? So what I would like to do is kind of briefly discuss at what point I think it is worth playing a wildcard. And then I thought I would also, as you can see here, just list, in my opinion, at this very, very early stage, based on the predicted blanks, doubles, and fixture swings, when do I think will be the best 4 opportunities to wildcard? So firstly, at what point do we decide to wildcard instead of taking a hit? I do have a number in mind, but it's not as simple as just saying if you are going to take more than this points hit, then you wildcard, because sometimes you don't have to take that hit. You can, and it can genuinely work. Play 9 or 10 players. And I know that sounds crazy and it's definitely not optimal, but if it allows you to save the most powerful chip in the game, and believe me, the wildcard is the most powerful chip in the game, and also allows you to keep players that maybe could be back for next week if they're only injured or suspended for 1 week, then of course, it may well be okay to in that week only play 9 or 10. In all honesty, in most weeks, 2 or 3 of your players probably score 0, 1 or 2 points. So if you have 9 rather than 11, but all 9 of your players or 8 of those players do very well, then you may not even be on a particularly big red arrow. That being said, there is a certain point where I'm like, if I need to take a hit, like my team is a mess and I need to make a certain set of transfers this week, for me, that number is minus 16. I think it is worth taking a minus 12 hit to keep the most powerful chip in the game in the wildcard, especially if I don't think it is a good week to play the chip. And I personally don't think that Game Week 21, in comparison to some future weeks, is a good week to wildcard. So for me, if you can take a minus 12 and it puts you in a perfect position and you think you need to take that hit as well, I would still take it. When you are moving towards minus 16, let's say you have like 9 flagged players and your team is a real mess, then of course, you may well have to bite the bullet and just wildcard in that week, despite it maybe not being the most optimal week on paper to wildcard. Is a wildcard viable this week? Of course it is. And every single year, lots and lots of managers wildcard in the first week where the wildcard becomes available, and they do incredibly well. There's always this debate around early versus late wildcard, both in the first half and the second half of the season. And believe me, early wildcards work very, very well. Let's say you jump on triple Brighton this week with a nice fixture run. And let's say Brighton beat Wolves 4-0. João Pedro brace, Gross brace, and Estepinian gets 2 assists and a clean sheet. Immediately, just from those 3 players alone, the wildcard was probably worth it. If you then add in some of the other stuff, like being able to move out Trent and Salah if you want to, being able to bring Haaland back in easily, a wildcard could certainly work this week. So I'm not going to sit here and try and put you off of it massively, but what I did want to do is just show that, in my opinion, there are 4 better weeks to wildcard. And one of those weeks where I think it will be better to wildcard is actually Game Week 22, which is next week. And the reason a lot of people, myself included, think 22 is better than 21 is there's a 2-week gap between the Game Week 21 deadline and the Game Week 22 deadline. It's actually more than 2 weeks. And in those 2 weeks, we are going to find out 3 or 4 very important pieces of information. The first is around the domestic cups. So we will have the second leg of the EFL Cup semi-finals, which will give us some information around blank Game Week 26 and then potentially double Game Week 25. That's the first thing. The other thing is the FA Cup 4th round fixtures, at least the initial game. If there are replays, we won't see, but the initial game for the 4th round will be before, again, the Game Week 22 deadline. The 4th round FA Cup matches and who progresses will give us a better idea about which teams will blank in 29. And not only that, remember, the teams that blank in 29 will also double in 34 and or 37. So in the next couple of weeks, we are going to find out so much more information about future blanks and doubles. On top of that, we'll get more information around Haaland's potential return. Let's say Haaland re-aggravates his injury. You might not need Haaland. Let's say that Salah gets injured at AFCON. You may not need Salah. Let's say that Trent is immediately back, as is Bowen. You may well choose to pick those two. So I just think there is too much information that will come in the next 2 weeks to make Game Week 21 a better wildcard choice than 22. So if you are looking at your team now and it is a disaster, take a -4, maybe a -8, sort your team out, go for a couple of one-week punts like Tony and João Pedro, and then maybe in Game Week 22 is when you look to wildcard. After 22, I think 25 will be the most popular, simply because it is looking likely at the moment that Liverpool and City could both potentially double. And if that's the case, you may want to go for triple Liverpool and triple City. And if you do sell Salah or Trent, you don't own Darwin, maybe you've only got Foden, you may only have 1 or 2 players from Liverpool and City at the moment. And also, if Spurs and Chelsea blank in Game Week 26, you may want to remove all of your Chelsea players and maybe only keep like 1 Spurs player like Porro or maybe a Richarlison. So Game Week 25, I think, will be the next popular point after Game Week 22. After that, you're moving beyond blank Game Week 29. So we've got blank Game Week 29. I think Game Week 30 will be a very, very popular one because it's directly after the blank. There is a pretty big fixture swing in Game Week 30/31 for a lot of teams. And it just allows you to prepare for the upcoming doubles, but also sort out the team that might be a bit of a mess because you might have had to take certain players out in blank Game Week 29. So I like the idea of Game Week 30. And then after that, it's just if you want to set up for a bench boost in 34 or 37. And I think if you do, 34 is probably a better week to bench boost. And I think Game Week 37, which is another double, would be a better point to triple captain or maybe free hit. So I think the best time to wildcard, if you're going as late as possible, is probably a Game Week 33 wildcard to set up for a Game Week 34 bench boost. Hopefully that is clear. Lots of ifs, buts, and maybes. And again, before Game Week 22, we'll have a lot more information. For me, it's not the best time to wildcard as a result. I would be fine taking up to a -12 hit this week if you need it. But on the hits, like, you don't need a hit if you've got 11 players. Even if Archer is one of those players and we don't know if he's going to start, do you need to take a hit to not field him? Probably not. Even if one of your players is like Dan Burn against Man City, he's going to play. Like, you don't need to take a -16 to field 11 perfect players. Sometimes just getting the players out is enough. I'm probably going to take at least a -4 hit this week. So if that makes you feel better, then that's good. Let's just, in case you are going to play the wildcard in 21, let's say you have to, or let's say you've already activated it. Let's take a look at what I would be going with for a Game Week 21 wildcard. So I'm not going to go through this in too much detail, but this is roughly what I'll be going with on a Game Week 21 wildcard. And I should say I gave this about 20 minutes of thought and nothing more because I'm not wildcarding this week. And therefore, beyond that and just making a decent draft for you guys for the video, it's a bit of a waste of my time going through all of the possible permutations and going through all of the best rotations with the defenders. But if you are wildcarding this week, you should absolutely do that. People spend far too little time spending time on the little aspects of their wildcard. And when I wildcard, I'm going to spend a hell of a lot of time doing it because little things like I said, your 5th defender. Does your 5th defender have a good fixture when your 4th or 3rd defender doesn't? That is very, very important. Is there a better goalkeeper rotation pair than Areola and Dubravka? Also for fairly cheap? There may well be. And these are things you need to think about if you're wildcarding. But for me, this is roughly what I would be going with. I've opted to have Haaland and not have Salah. But as you can see, I have 6.1 million in the bank, which depending on who I sell, does offer me a route back. For example, let's say I want to sell Saka for Salah around Game Week 25, then I can do that. If I want to go from like a Gross or a Richarlison, it may make it a little bit more difficult. But I've left that 6.1 in the bank so that it is possible around Game Week 24, 25, if you want to bring Salah back in without having to make loads of transfers. And yes, even if Haaland's not available for 21, I probably still would have him because as you can see, I've got Pascal Gross, Pedro Porro and Walker on the bench. This is a very, very strong squad. And in my opinion, just because I've got decent team value and just due to the issues that keep arising, the upcoming doubles and blanks, and the possibility that you're going to want to play a bench boost at some point again because you're not going to get another wildcard, I would go for a strong squad at the moment. I wouldn't go with a really, really cheap bench. So this is roughly what I'd go for. Doty, Estepinian, Gabriel, in my opinion, is probably the best back three at the moment. But you can see, I even have Pedro Porro and Walker on the bench. It is quite an expensive back five, but I really, really like it. You could go cheaper on one of those players if you wanted to. I think a midfield five of Richarlison, Saka, Palmer, Foden, and Gross looks absolutely perfect. And then around, again, game week 24, 25, you can decide which of those you want to sell to bring in Salah. And then I've got Haaland, Watkins, and João Pedro. I really do like João Pedro. I would be willing to take the risk. I know this is a Brighton triple up, but they've got the best fixtures in the league, and they've been looking pretty good recently. I would keep Ollie Watkins because he's just so consistent and so reliable. The only concern with the attack is there are no Liverpool assets, so I don't have Jota, I don't have Darwin. At the moment, I obviously don't have Salah. On top of that, I don't have Ivan Toney, who could be a really nice punt if you want to go there. Maybe you go Toney instead of Watkins, or maybe instead of João Pedro. But again, that makes it a little bit more difficult to move back to Salah. And then there is no Solanke. And Solanke in either any of the upcoming normal game weeks or potentially game week 28 is going to have a double game week at some point, and therefore he is probably a player that you would want to think about getting back into your team. So there are a few missing pieces here. I think the lack of Liverpool is probably the big one given how good they are and given the fact that they probably double in game week 25. But what I do have here is a really nice triple up on City. I've got Foden, Haaland and Walker. I'll bring Salah back in. Maybe going into 25 with 2 Liverpool and 3 City may well be enough. And this is assuming they double. They may well not. So this is roughly what I would go for on a wildcard. I would love to know down below in the comments if you are wildcarding, is this similar to yours? And if you have any questions around wildcard, do let me know about down below. For most of us though, we're probably going to keep it at least until 22. If you want my very quick and brief opinion on when I think I'll wildcard, for me, I think I'm likely to wildcard post game week 29. I think I would try to get through game week 21 to 29, maybe playing my free hit, maybe playing my triple captain, but not using the wildcard. And then post blank game week going into the final 2 doubles of the season, I think that's when I'll look to deploy the wildcard. Let me know what you think down below. So I spoke about Trent and Salah quite a lot in my own team selection. If you've not seen that, that was released yesterday. Feel free after this video or now to go back and watch my team selection video and what I'm currently planning with my team. And I discussed Trent and Salah in a lot of detail in that video. But just to briefly cover it here in case you don't have time to go and watch that video. If we need to sell one of Salah or Trent this week, and a lot of people are in that position, who would you prefer to sell and why? And I've got the fixtures obviously above the graphic. I've got, at the moment, the possibility of a double game week 25 again of Brentford and Luton. And if they do have that double game week, they would then blank in 26. If they don't blank in 26, if Fulham somehow progress into the EFL Cup final, which is possible, then of course Fulham and Man United would blank in 26, and then Liverpool wouldn't blank in 26, and they would have a single game week in 25. So this is just a hypothesis that the fixtures will be roughly this. And I think what we're probably looking at is Salah, based on the odds, will be back around game week 24 or 25. That's what the odds suggest. He could be back as early as 22 or 23, and he could be back as late as midway through 25 going into 26 if Egypt win AFCON and he goes on the winners parade back in Egypt. So there are lots of possibilities, but we're predicting around game week 24 to 25. For Trent, the latest is that they do think he's out for 3 weeks, right? And if it is 3 weeks, that puts him in and around the Chelsea game. I've seen a few journalists now suggesting that they are aiming for the Chelsea game. And if not the Chelsea game, it will be the Arsenal game. But do remember, there's only 3 or 4 days between Chelsea and Arsenal because the Chelsea game is a midweek game and then it's Arsenal at the weekend. So if he does miss 22 and there's a tiny little setback, even if it's only half a week, 3 or 4 days, that is enough for him to then lose Arsenal. So I think we may potentially be in a position where Trent could be back for Chelsea Arsenal, but realistically where you would want Trent and Salah back are both for game week 24. But of course, I think unless you're planning to sell Saka and or Watkins and some of your other players around that sort of £7 to £9 million mark, you can't have Trent, Salah and Haaland. You are going to have to choose one of them to sacrifice. And I don't think anyone wants to sacrifice Haaland at the moment because when he's back, he's had a full rest in terms of just his mental capacity, and he's also had a full rest with everything else on his body. Yes, he's had the injury, but you would imagine he comes back raring to go. KDB could be back too, and their fixtures are pretty good and a potential double. We want Haaland in our team. So no, Haaland's not an option. And to be honest, no Salah, I think for most of us, probably isn't an option. If Salah has a double game week of Brentford and Luton, you just can't go without him. I think he's maybe even a better captaincy option than Haaland in that week. So it probably is, if you are to sacrifice one, Trent. The benefit, though, to keeping Trent and selling Salah is that it gives you a bit more time to assess what happens with Salah at AFCON. Again, if Salah does win AFCON with Egypt, it could well be that he misses the Brentford game and he only plays the Luton one. And again, that's not a bad fixture, but is he a necessity if he's not here until 25, only plays the one fixture, blanks in 26, and then likely a good chance that he blanks in 29 as well? Then I would say, actually, I'd rather have Trent and I don't particularly need or want Salah. It is a tricky one. I think based on everything that we know right now, I would feel slightly more comfortable losing Trent. Just because I think there is more chance than not that Salah is back for 25. And I think if you get in a position now where you sell Salah and keep Trent and you use that Salah money to buy a Haaland, what is your route back to Salah? Well, it's probably selling Trent. So why not sell Trent now where we don't know that he'll be back for Chelsea and Arsenal? And even if he is, those aren't particularly good fixtures. So I think I'm leaning more towards, if you were to sell one, it's Trent. And when I'm looking at it currently right now, I may well sell Trent anyway. My plan this week is to try and keep both of them, just to give me the options. Because let's say that Trent is definitely back for Chelsea, and let's say that Salah gets injured at AFCON, then I'd want to keep Trent. If Trent looks like he's out long term, and maybe Salah and Egypt don't look particularly good, and we think they could get knocked out early, then of course, in that situation, I would much rather keep Salah and sell Trent. So I think the next 2 weeks will make it very important. And also, we'll have information around blank game week 26 and double game week 25, which may impact our thinking. And also, potentially blank game week 29. So I just think so much will happen in the next 2 weeks that for me, my current plan is to keep both Salah and Trent, wedge them on my bench. It will be probably a rough game week 21, but it just gives me that little bit more flexibility in my decision making. But my opinion is, if you are to sell one of them this week, I would feel more comfortable selling Trent. I would tuck Salah. If you are to keep Trent and sell Salah, just make sure you've got some kind of route back to Salah, because I guarantee you'll want him back for 25 if he's available. So once again, I've already discussed Son and Salah replacements in quite a lot of detail this week in my Game Week preview video. Again, if you want more Raptor content and you're not bored of my voice and my face, then you can go back and watch that video. It is still all very relevant. I would say it was probably my best video of the season thus far, in my opinion. So if you want to go back and watch that, feel free to do so. And I go through the stats of every single player that I think you could replace them with in lots and lots of detail. But just to recap, and also my thinking might have changed slightly, here are my favourite replacements in order. This is very opinion-based. It's my interpretation of everything. And there are a few caveats in there as well. But for me, if you don't own Saka, Saka would be top for me because he's got pretty much everything you would want from a player. He's very, very reliable. And yes, he's expensive, but I think he's worth it. And I would argue he's, and we're going to discuss captaincy, in the top 2 or 3 captaincy options for this week as well. So for me, if you don't own Saka, I still don't think this is a bad entry point for him, and I've been very impressed with him recently, data-wise. He's not been finishing all of his chances. Yes, he looks a bit fatigued, but he's still getting the chances, and I think from an FPL perspective, that's what we want. Palmer is still a fantastic buyer. The only thing that I'm not sure about with Palmer is we're still not 100% sure that he takes every pen, although we do think he will. But we're still not sure on that when Nkunku's on the pitch and once he's played a few more games as well. And also, if Chelsea do turn it around against Middlesbrough in the EFL Cup semi-final, Palmer will blank in game week 26. Other than that, there is nothing. And also the fixtures in the next 2 or 3 start to turn a little bit. But he's just such a brilliant option. Again, in the top 2 or 3 captaincy options this week, his data is brilliant. On pens, some set pieces, really, really nailed on as well. I almost don't care about the fixtures with Palmer. I still think I'd be happy playing him every week. So I think Saka and Palmer for me are still the 2 best options. But let's assume that a lot of people probably own those 2. After that, I still think it's Richarlison. The best data by far out of all of the potential options. He should be on penalties in the absence of Son. The only concern with Richarlison is, of course, Werner is now available. With Werner available, though, I think the front 4 against Manchester United will be Kulusevski in the 10, Brennan Johnson probably on the right, Timo Werner on the left, and Richarlison as the 9. I think it'll be Werner goes out to the left. I think Richarlison will stay as the 9, and Kulusevski will drop into the 10. However, once Maddison is back, well, then Maddison goes into the 10, and then you've got one of those attackers that needs to sit on the bench. But I just don't see any reason why that would be Richarlison. He's been scoring quite a few goals recently. On top of that, I think Spurs fans don't seem to like him, but I think he's doing the job, which is getting in the box and scoring goals. And Spurs seem to really like under Postecoglou, getting towards the byline, cutting back the crosses and having someone tap it in. And there is no one better in that team to tap in goals than Richarlison. His movement in the box is very, very good. And I think Postecoglou will see that. Obviously, once Son and Maddison are back, and let's say Lo Celso comes back as well, then yes, it starts to become a bit tricky then. But I think for the next 3 or 4 games, Richarlison is the best option outside of Saka and Palmer. The only concern, again, as with Palmer, if Chelsea make the EFL Cup final, Richarlison will blank in 26. So there are a few risks associated with him. He's not for everyone, but I think he is for me. And at the moment, he is my favourite option, simply because I already own Saka and Palmer. I've actually bumped Foden up slightly. I think I'm being a little bit harsh on Foden. He has been very good over the last 2 or 3 games. And whilst the data isn't perfect for him, he does have a probable upcoming double game week in 25 or 28. He has been returning recently, and he seems to be in a pretty hot streak at the moment. And therefore, I think, especially if Haaland's back soon, I think that will only make him a better option. I do like Phil Foden. I already own him, and maybe that's why I'm not so hot on him. Maybe if I didn't own Foden, I would have him even higher up the list. But because I already own him, And I'm a little bit worried about whether he's going to get full minutes. I still think he'll start most games. Will he get full minutes at the moment? I'm a little bit more unsure just due to KDB and Haaland coming back very soon. But listen, Foden will definitely start in 21. I think he's a great option, and I've bumped him up to 4th in the list. After that, I still think there are 4 really good options in Gross, Garnacho, Eze and Jota. I think Pascal Gross is the safe, steady option. He'll play every minute for Brighton. He'll be on penalties in the absence of João Pedro whenever that is. João Pedro could play every minute, but if he's not, Gross will take the penalty. He's on some set pieces, and the data over the last 6 to 8 game weeks has been very, very good for Pascal Gross. The fixtures are brilliant for Brighton coming up. There's very little to dislike about him, other than the fact that just when you watch Brighton, like Richarlison will be in the 6-yard box constantly. Gross will at points drop between the centre-backs. At points he'll end up on the right wing. At points he'll end up in the box. But he's all over the place when you watch him because he almost plays that box-to-box role for Brighton. But he can play pretty much anywhere in their team. And as a result, it can be frustrating at points when you're watching Brighton to just not see him in the box where you want him scoring goals. I've actually got Garnacho in 6th. That's taken into account his price. But for a lot of people, I'm seeing them say things such as, oh, I don't like any of the midfielders. I thought it'd be really easy to replace Son and Salah, and I just don't like any of them. If you truly don't like any of them, buy Garnacho. And the reason I say that is he's nailed at the moment. The fixtures are pretty good for Man United. I expect them to score against Spurs, and he's so cheap that it will offer you such an easier route back to Haaland whilst potentially keeping Salah and or Trent. At some point, we are going to have a very cheap 5th midfielder if we want to get all of the players that we want in our team into our team. So if you're really not sure this week, just go and buy Garnacho. What's the worst that can happen? Right? If you really don't think there is a standout midfielder, I would argue that that's the best play because it just makes you so flexible moving forward. And I am tempted to do that. If I do have worries about Richarlison, and I am finding it quite tricky to get Haaland back in 22 without taking yet another hit, maybe Garnacho's the play. I don't know. In 7th, I have Eze. I know people generally don't like Eze, but his minutes are good. He's on pens, and I think he'll continue to get steady returns for Crystal Palace. The only issue is the fixture in 21 is so bad. If this was game week 22, I may well bump Eze up to 5th or 6th, but for now he's in 7th. And then just to finish, Jota isn't for me simply because I just don't know if he's going to start or not. I don't have a clue what that Liverpool front three will be. I think it will probably be Diaz, Jota, Darwin would be my prediction. And I think Elliott may drop into midfield. But Elliott has been preferred on the right thus far in the absence of Salah. So maybe it's Elliott and then Jota, Darwin, Diaz, and even to some extent Gakpo if he's not starting in midfield. I just don't know what that's going to look like. And even if Jota starts, he's certainly not getting 90 minutes. And then remember, game week 22 and 23, there's only a 4-day gap. Are you certain that Jota's going to start in 22 and 23? I'm not so sure. So for me, just the minutes aren't good enough. When you've got someone like a Pascal Gross who's so nailed, or someone like a Richarlison with brilliant data and probably on penalties in the absence of Son. I just think there are other good options to choose that just edge it for me. But Jota has really high upside. He's a really good goal threat, and I still like him as an option. I just think there are better options now for me. I've listed some other options like Sarabia, really good data and very, very cheap. Erdegaard, Gordon, Bailey Diaz, Rashford and Bruno if you want to go there. Bernardo Silva, Neto. That isn't all of them. But for me, those will be the top 8. At the moment, I have Saka, I have Palmer, and I have Foden. So for me, it's Richarlison, Gross, Garnacho, Eze or Jota, and I'm just about edging Richarlison. So if you own Jarrod Bowen, firstly, very, very unlucky. He's not an injury-prone player, and no one really saw this coming. And if you moved early, I don't like early transfers, and this is going to sound pretty harsh. I also think it was a bad week to move early. It just, with the gap that we had and with the fixtures that were being played in the meantime, most of the players that people brought in had a fixture. I don't think it was a good point to move early. So I do think that was a mistake. Even not in hindsight, I just think it was. However, moving for someone like a Jarrod Bowen who just never gets injured and plays every available minute, that is the unlucky part. So a little bit unfortunate there. If you are in a position, maybe you already owned Bowen, by the way, but if you're in a position where you have Bowen in your team, what would I do? The fixtures are a bit of a mixed bag. Sheffield United is one of the better ones. Then they play Bournemouth, who in all honesty have been pretty good recently. They're one of the better defences, but we don't know that he's available for that Bournemouth game. Then it's United away, Arsenal at home, Forest away, and that's not even a great fixture. I mean, the fixtures aren't particularly there for West Ham over the foreseeable future. But what I do like about Bowen is he's got a very nice fixture against Brentford at home in game week 26, which is a possible / likely blank game week. I don't mind him there. But again, by then, Brentford might improve. They've actually been the 5th best defence in the league this season. I think actually 4th best defence in the league this season for non-penalty expected goals conceded. So they have been a decent defence by all accounts. And with Tony coming back, some of their other players returning, I don't think the fixtures are particularly good now for West Ham if you remove 21 and potentially 22. The news that we got from Jacob Steinberg was firstly tweeted on January 10th that basically Bowen's going to go for a scan and it's not looking good. And then he quote retweeted that. And then he said, the better news is that Bowen should only be out for 2 to 3 weeks. And at the time of me recording this, which is on Thursday evening for a Friday morning upload, I don't have any further information about Bowen. If you do, and it looks extremely likely that he's back for 22, and there's maybe even a chance he's back for 21, then you feel free to keep him. But I think if we're in a position where we're just not sure, I wouldn't mind selling Bowen this week. And I've seen some people in the position, and I think this is a lot trickier, where they're like, I need to sell one of Bowen and Trent. And maybe that's you right now. Let me know down below if it is. That's very tricky. Because if you were to say who is more likely, based on the info that we have to play in 22, Bowen or Trent, I would say Bowen. However, fixtures-wise and also just asset-wise, especially with the potential upcoming double, I would argue that I would rather have Trent than I would Bowen. So it's a very, very tricky one. I don't think you will be massively punished if you sell Bowen like you would have if you'd have had a really nice run of fixtures. If the fixtures coming up were like Sheffield United, Bournemouth, Burnley, Luton or something like that, I'd say you don't sell him. But with the fact that they are playing a very good Bournemouth defence, an okay Man United defence at points, but not particularly good, but it is at Old Trafford, and then they're playing Arsenal at home, I don't think that's a perfect set of fixtures, and I don't think the punishment for removing Bowen will be too high. Would be my prediction. And that is assuming that he is back for Bournemouth, right? He could well miss the Bournemouth game. So my answer is probably I would feel okay selling him. I don't think it's a terrible decision, especially if you can't field 11 players. If you can field 11 players and keep Bowen on your bench, I would probably lean more towards that and just assess, because again, anything could happen over the next 2 weeks. Let's say that Bowen is back for 22 and you get 3 or 4 further injuries and you're like, why on earth did I sell Bowen? Bowen wasn't an issue. I could have just tucked him on my bench. So if you were in a position where you don't have to sell him, keep him. If you're in a position where you have to sell someone, like a Salah, a Trent, a Bowen, sell Son first. But after that, I wouldn't mind selling Jarrod Bowen. So we're going to finish the video by discussing captaincy, and this is a very tricky decision. And in all honesty, until we get Haaland back and or Salah and Son, it is going to continue to be tricky, because I do think there's a bit of price bias, by the way. I think sometimes we captain players because they are premiums, but the reason they are premiums is they are reliable and consistent, as well as having a higher ceiling. And in all honesty, that's what we want from a captain, right? You want your captain to feel fairly likely that they will return in any given game, but also have that monster haul ability. Because if they miss either of those things, let's say they miss the consistency part, they can get you a 25-pointer, but you never know when it's going to come. You don't feel comfortable captaining them. Raheem Sterling is a great example. Would you feel comfortable captaining Sterling this week? No. Could Sterling deliver you a 25-pointer? Yes. And it's because of the consistency. But you remove the other part and you say, I've got a player here that will score you 6 points every week, but they never haul. Again, you don't feel comfortable captaining them because they just don't ever have that ability to get you a lot of points. So you need both of those. And that is really the essence of what you look at when you're looking for a captain. Now, when I look at the players that can deliver that in Game Week 21, I think there are a few, but it's tricky to try and find the one that we think will deliver that big haul this week. Regarding the City assets, I just never know how to predict Newcastle. I don't know if they'll turn up and concede 7 XG or beat Man City 1-0. I think the fact that it's at home is definitely in their advantage, but let's be honest, I mean, Forest just scored 3 recently against Newcastle. Chris Wood got a hat-trick. So I'm certainly not ruling out big returns for Foden and Alvarez, but the unpredictability of Newcastle puts me off captaining someone against them, especially when they are playing at home, because I just don't know which version of Newcastle is going to turn up. That's what puts me off Foden and Alvarez. I said the same about Foden in 20 and it turned out to be wrong, but the thing that puts me off Foden is no penalties, no set pieces, and average data. And again, there's the whole eye test thing, he's playing great, whatever. Still doesn't have the pens, still doesn't have the set pieces. And even eye test-wise, Foden's goal threat isn't particularly high. And it never has been, and this season in particular, it really isn't. He's been a little bit more creative, but he's just not shown much ability from open play to get lots of chances to score goals. He is reliant at the moment on exceptional finishing. And is Foden a good finisher? Yes. Do I think he will continue finishing at his recent rate? I'm less convinced of that. So I think they are both fine options, but I would always lean towards Alvarez because he has corners, free kicks, and penalties in the absence of Haaland. My concern about Alvarez this week is KDB will almost definitely be on the bench against Newcastle by the quotes that we've got from both Pep and from KDB. So I think he'll be on the bench. I think he'll probably come on at some point, and it probably will be for Alvarez. So I think Alvarez will get limited minutes. And on the off chance that Haaland's available, Haaland could also come off the bench. And on the very small chance, at the moment at least, that Haaland is available to start, then Alvarez may not even start, and he certainly wouldn't be on pens. I think most likely both Foden and Alvarez start. I think Foden will get better minutes than Alvarez. And therefore, whilst I think Alvarez is a better FPL option to captain than Foden, I just don't fancy going for either. So for me, it's a no for the City boys. For Ollie Watkins, he's a similar player to Foden in that he doesn't have penalties and he doesn't have set pieces. That doesn't mean, again, Foden and Watkins have had brilliant returns recently. I'm not saying they can't return, but with captaincy, I want to improve my chances every single week of getting as many returns as possible. And having set pieces and having penalties are two big advantages. So for me, therefore, I'm not particularly interested in Ollie Watkins. Other players that aren't on this list before I discuss Saka and Palmer, Darwin, Jota. Would I captain them? No, because I don't know if they're even going to start, and I don't know how many minutes they'll get, and I still don't know who is on penalties for Liverpool in the absence of Salah. We think it could be Darwin, but I'm not confident enough that he starts, and I'm not confident enough that he's on penalties. Is there anyone else I've missed? Probably let me know down below if I've missed anyone. Richarlison, you could go for if you wanted to. A Man United player, if you feel like you can predict whether there'll be a lot of goals and who will dominate that game between Spurs and Man United, maybe. But for me, the two main options are Saka and Palmer, because as I said, what you need from an asset when you're looking for captaincy is consistency and haul ability. Now, this season, Saka has been very consistent. Maybe not in the last few, but he's been very consistent. But he hasn't maybe shown that ability to haul. So if we're going based on that, Palmer definitely wins that competition because Palmer has shown on a few occasions now he can comfortably get 14 points and above. I mean, only last week he got a massive score. Palmer has shown that. And he didn't even get a penalty. So it's not even because he was lucky in getting a penalty and that led him to full bonus. That was from open play. So if we're looking at who has shown this season and in recent games that they have a big score in them, it is Palmer. And if you watch the Middlesbrough game, Palmer could have hauled once again. He had insane data. He had loads of shots. I think he's had more than 4 shots in 5 of his last 6 games or something like that. So Palmer is a player that is going to continue to get big scores based on the way that he's playing. But when you actually look at their underlying data, and that's what I look at myself, I look at their expected goal involvement every game. Saka in 2 of the last 3 or 4 games has popped over 1 XG. In one of those games, he had XGI, not XG, XGI. He's had 0.9 XGI in one of those games as well. He is getting the chances and creating the chances as well. He's just not finishing them, and his teammates aren't finishing them. And you may say, yes, Ross, that's why I don't want to captain Saka, because he's not in a good run of form, and neither are Arsenal. But at some point, that changes, right? At some point, a team will go from playing poor to well, and at some point, a team will go from playing well to poor. It doesn't just continue the same way forever. And maybe the sensible thing is wait until Arsenal start playing well, wait until Saka starts actually returning, and that's when you start considering him for captaincy. I just think I might be willing to take a risk this week. It's a nice home fixture against Palace. The data has been saying for a while now, for the last 6 or 8 game weeks, Saka is due a big return, and he's just not necessarily delivering on that. And so it is a risk to captain him. I would say that the safer captain, based on everything that we've seen recently, probably is Palmer. But I've just got a bit of a feeling about Saka. So I'm going to leave it there, because again, this is all my opinion, really. I can't predict the future. I don't always get my captaincy decision right. But at the moment, it's Saka and Palmer. I'm not even going to say Saka's a better option. For me, I've got Saka ahead of Palmer, but it's Saka and Palmer. And then after that, I don't really know, in all honesty. I mean, I didn't even mention Solanke, some people considering him, but it would probably be, in my team, Saka, Palmer, Alvarez, Darwin, Foden. You could go for a Pascal Gross, Richarlison, Solanke, any of those other players if you wanted to. But I think if you've got Saka or Palmer, trust them. Penalties, free kicks, corners, a great open play threat, everything you want and more, and 2 nice home fixtures as well. Let me know down below in the comments, who are you captaining for GameWeek 21? So guys, there you have it. That is my GameWeek 21 deadline decisions video. Hopefully you did enjoy. And if you got any use out of today's video, please smash that like button. Make sure to subscribe as well. We are fast approaching 110,000 subscribers. And I've set the goal this year for 150,000 subscribers by the end of 2024. So help me in achieving that. And until next time, which will be later today, the deadline stream. Thank you very much for watching. Cheers. Bye-bye.